Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deconstructing Diaries YouTube channel. Hope you guys are doing well. Thank you so much for stopping by and watching another one of my videos. Okay, so you probably or you will see a video come out in the next couple days, maybe even the same day as this video, of me giving my perspective on dating at IHOP, kind of the dating culture, all of that. I recorded that video several days before this news just came out. So I am speaking to you not live necessarily or breaking news, but this is something that's probably been out as of today, as of 8:15 this morning. A new Julie Royce report came out about IHOP. And so I just had to come on and just kind of talk through the report and just give my thoughts as a former IHOPper, and just kind of share my thoughts. So really this video, I'll be reading the report. Like I said, it just came out this morning at 8:15 Central Standard Time about IHOP closing, IHOP disbanding. So I want to read that article, give a couple of my thoughts, and I would love to hear from you in the comments what your thoughts are. If you're a former IHOPper like me, what your thoughts are about this article, what's kind of going on in the community as it's happening. So I just wanted to kind of give that preface because, again, you'll see that dating video for me and you're going to be like, well, what's the point of learning about dating culture at IHOP if they're disbanding? But I think it's still a good video to watch just to kind of get an idea of the culture, and see if that's something that's going to be perpetuated and continued on with their new rebranding. So I got my phone here, so I'm just going to read the article as it goes. There's going to be mentions of like an audio within the article, and there's also going to be a mention of like emails and things that were shared with the Roy's report. I'm not going to read those particular pieces of items to you just because like the audio itself, I listened to it this morning, it's like an hour long, so nobody's got time for that. And I want you to listen for yourself and kind of draw your own conclusion. So here we go. So here's the Roy's report. So it says breaking: embattled IHOPKC to close, start new organization to limit liability. And again, this was published April 16th, 2024 at 8:15 Central Standard Time. All right, so it says the International House of Prayer Kansas City, IHOPKC, will be closing its doors and starting a new organization following months of clergy sexual abuse allegations against its founder, Mike Bickle, leaders announced at an internal IHOP University staff meeting yesterday. A leaked audio recording of the meeting that Roy's report, TRR, obtained reveals the organization is bleeding $500,000 a month due to donors being too connected to the now permanently removed Bickle. Leaders hope this move will limit IHOPKC's liability regarding victims' lawsuits, said Isaac Bennett, pastor of IHOPKC's Forerunner Church, in the meeting. Quote, "We're the people to sue at the end of the day," end quote, said Bennett, "that produces significant liabilities here." That's another quote from Isaac Bennett. Okay, so I'm going to pause there for just a second. I think that's interesting that, and if you listen to the audio, that was definitely alluded to, like, hey, we need to reduce liability here. And that was one of the things that I wrote down when I was listening to this audio, is that they are so concerned about protecting themselves versus doing the right thing. Could have things gone differently to now where you are having to, I'm just thinking through, like, if you actually did the right thing, maybe actually gone through with like this third-party investigation, maybe things would have looked different. Maybe your doors would still have to close, but maybe it wouldn't be so impactful in that way. Continue on with the article. Let's continue on. Okay, so it says, leaders hope this move will limit IHOPKC's liability regarding victim lawsuits. Oh, I just read that. Okay. However, Boz Chivichian, an attorney who represents multiple Jane Does who've accused Bickle of clergy sexual abuse, told TRR that IHOPKC is in, quote, fantasy land if it thinks closing down and starting a new organization protects its assets from lawsuits. To try to do so will be, quote, fraudulent, Chivichian said. So what he's referring to is in the audio, they talked about they being like Isaac Bennett, Matt Candler, and I think another guy that's helping kind of lead IHOP right now. They were talking about how they feel like they need to close their doors, not from a financial perspective, but also like to help rebrand. And so they just felt like, hey, it's better to kind of sunset IHOPKC as we know it and then kind of move anew into something else. And so I think what Boz is saying is like, hey, you're kind of living in delusion here if you think just rebranding and basically moving on as it is and like just re-slapping it on as like a different name, but you're still basically essentially IHOP. Like you're living in a fantasy land, and it could be borderline fraudulent if you're not truly rebranding, is what I understand it to be. So let's go back to the article. Matt Candler, president of IHOP University, made the announcement that IHOPKC's gradual closing to staff yesterday. TRR also obtained an email of the same announcement, which is embedded in the report. Which, by the way, I will include this report in my video so you can read it yourself and just take a look at it yourself. IHOPKC as an organization is beginning to wind down, Candler said. We're going to be maintaining our prayer room and eventually beginning a new organization. IHOPKC has not made the announcement publicly and didn't immediately return an email requested by TRR for comment. Quote, we are seeing this present era coming to an end and the Lord beginning a new era, end quote, said Bennett in the meeting. IHOPKC has been consulting with various experts on how to handle the situation, said Bennett on the recording. It could rebrand, but it does not address its underlying governance issues that have led to many allegations of mishandling of abuse allegations, Bennett said. It also does not protect the organization from the people who have decided to sue IHOPKC. Which, if you have a legitimate claim and you feel like no one's listened to your concerns, especially if it comes down to what these women are alleging with Mike Bickle, in my opinion, I believe, yes, absolutely take any type of legal recourse you may have if it includes having to legally hold people accountable. I know there's some Christian groups that don't believe in suing. I think there's some contextual things with that, but I think that when it comes to abuse type of things, abuse allegations and restitution and holding people accountable, I think there is certain contexts where you have your right to go after them legally. Okay, let's go back to the article. Quote, in cases where there's clergy abuse, where there's allegations that are outstanding, where there now's interest in having an investigation that goes back through all of our 24-year history to find cases where there's been mishandling of abuse or where there's been cover-up or whatever else it is people believe has been going on, those things will produce inevitably a contingent of individuals who are wanting to seek restitution, said Bennett. And they are not going to knock on Mike's door, well, because he probably won't answer. But they are not going to knock on Mike's door because he does not have any money. But IHOPKC has facilities. I want to pause there. So if you're thinking like, Mike's broke, me personally, I do not believe Mike Bickle is broke. He has earned millions of dollars over the years with books, sales, all of that. He would tell people that he would give it back to the prayer movement, but you can't tell me that he would sow all of that back to the prayer movement, prayer room. I do believe this man has money. Now, he might not be like a Bill Gates rich, but I think he's well off, and his wife ran a successful realty company. So to say that like, oh, Mike doesn't have any money, but IHOPKC has facilities and we would have to liquidate our assets, I feel like that's, me personally, this is my opinion, I want to be very clear, I feel like that is misleading. I feel like that's false because there is information out there suggesting that Mike Bickle does have money. And he's not broke as a joke is like what they're trying to make him out to be. Let's keep reading. Okay. Chavicchian, however, told TRR this thinking is misguided. I would 100% agree. The notion that they can just shut it down and start a new organization and all of that prior potential liability is wiped away is fantasy land, Chavicchian said. To suddenly take on all the property, put it in a name of a new organization to limit liability that would, what I believe, be a fraudulent transfer. A court would not allow that, end quote. Chavicchian said he put IHOPKC on notice about one claim, but isn't aware of any pending lawsuits. Typically, people can still sue organizations for a set period of time after they've shut down, he said. If someone files a claim against the old organization, they will be able to attach the claim to the new organization and new assets, he said, which he's 100% right. That's my understanding. I'm not a lawyer, but working in the HR world, and I work with lawyers, on certain matters, that's 100% true. From an HR perspective, like if someone were to file like a lawsuit of like discrimination or harassment, and not only could they go after the company, but they could actually go after a potential individual. So like if an employee was discriminated against like their manager, let's say, they could sue the company that they worked for, but then they could also personally sue that manager. And so there is some type of liability. And from my understanding legally, they could still sue that person even if that person is no longer connected to the company. So they could go after you personally and get after your assets. So what Chavichian is saying is right, from my understanding of the law and just, again, my HR contextual employment law knowledge. So we'll keep going. Financial problems at IHOPKC is the next part of the article. Bennett says IHOPKC's financial woes have been part of the crisis IHOPKC has been navigating for the last 6 months. We began to incur some pretty significant financial challenges of moving along at a pace of our expenses outpacing our revenue at about $500,000 a month, with no end in sight, Bennett said. Many of the IHOPKC donors previously gave because of Bickle, his message, and his anointing, Bennett said. A lot of our donors have been attached to the IHOPKC brand and to Mike specifically. But now we get a look at the pulling apart of Mike Bickle from IHOPKC. Those two have become largely inseparable. Bennett also blamed the drop in donations on a lot of distrust that was beginning to be sown. I'm going to pause there. A lot of the mistrust came because of how IHOP handled this whole situation when all the allegations about Mike Bickle came out in October of 2023. There were so many missteps, so many mishandlings. And so as a result of that, yes, there was a lot of distrust that was sown by you, IHOP, not necessarily, what you would probably consider bad actors of people trying to hold you accountable. So, it's take the plank out of your own eye here, right? Like you sowed a lot of this distrust. It wasn't us from people in the community saying, hey, do the right thing, bring in a third-party investigator, quit playing games, quit trying to hide behind all of these different facades, do the right thing, step up and say, hey, yeah, we want to bring in a third-party investigator. But because you took so many missteps, in my opinion, and I think a lot of other people on the outside looking in would agree that there was a lot of missteps that took place, you as an organization sowed the distrust. So don't put it on us. We did not sow distrust. We were trying to hold you accountable, but because through your actions, you sowed the distrust. So that's just my commentary there. Okay, back to the article. So to keep IHOPKC at the current operational level, IHOPKC would have to let go 90% of its paid staff, Bennett said. So instead of 500 staff, IHOPKC would have to run the organization with just 50, Bennett said. We are at an impasse. There's no way forward. So the Lord is kindly inviting us into a new era. That's like Christianese for like, we got to do something different. However, lack of donations isn't the only reason why IHOPKC is in financial crisis, Chavichian said. Rather than prioritizing care for alleged victims, IHOPKC has been spending money on lawyers and crisis managers, said Chavichian. And I would agree with that. That I believe that's one of their biggest missteps. Instead of just saying, hey, look, this doesn't look good. Yeah, we're in the wrong here. Let's bring in a third-party investigator. We're going to open our books, we're not going to hide anything from y'all. But instead, you lawyered up. You hired this Eric Voltz dude that was your crisis manager to try to diffuse the whole situation. And then he's there for a few months. You pay him however much money to try to make this thing go away, in my opinion. And then now he basically claims the crisis is over. It's far from over, as you can see from this article. Like IHOP is having to close its doors. So that, in my opinion, and again, I think other people would share this opinion and agree with me, that was, if not one of the main missteps, one of the bigger missteps is that they just decided to lawyer up, protect themselves, not be humble, not be transparent, and try to just make it go away. Okay, back to the article. Quote, they've been slowly draining funds by navigating this absolute disaster in a bad way as, excuse me. Oh, okay. Javichian just said it weird, so I'm having to reread it. Okay. They've been slowly draining funds by navigating this absolute disaster in about a bad a way as you can by spending more money than any of us probably can begin to imagine on lawyers and PR people, all who, in my opinion, have done a great disservice to not only victims, but also, quite frankly, in my opinion, IHOPKC, Chavichian said. And I would 100% agree with that statement. Before I go on reading, if you don't know who Boz Tavichian is, he is the grandson of Billy Graham. So he comes very highly credentialed, but he is a lawyer. I can't remember what he was on a podcast like a couple of years ago, and somebody interviewed him. If I can find the podcast, I'll link it because it gives a really good overview of his story. But he's a lawyer, and how he kind of got into this world of protecting like victims of like clergy sexual abuse and all of that is a really interesting story. But his role as an attorney, like he investigates religious organizations, gives them advice on how to handle allegations of clergy sexual abuse, things of that nature. Um, he was the lead, if he's still involved with Grace, which is like that big organization that investigates churches and religious organizations for issues just like this. And so he's a part of that. So initially, when this whole crisis happened, people were like, bring in Grace, which is the group that Boz is a part of. And IHOP didn't want to do that because at that point, I believe the main Jane Doe had hired Boz as her personal lawyer to represent her with her interactions with IHOPKC. So they're like, it's a conflict of interest. And so that was one of their main things that they didn't feel like they needed a third party investigation because they're like, well, Grace isn't going to work. And so then other advocates were like, well, there's other groups like Guidepost and some other religious organizations. And IHOP just dug in their heels and is like, we don't believe, we need that, and came up with excuses, in my opinion. Okay, so we'll go back to the article. So IHOPKC's closing will include IHOPKC's ministries, camps, church, and IHOP University, which is in its final semester, said Matt Candler. IHOPKC will phase out other ministries in the weeks to come, he said. The new organization will have a much smaller staff and won't depend on one single leader, Bennett said. Bennett blamed, quote, governance, naming Bickle's large role for leading to IHOPKC's current challenges. We are set up governance-wise to go through exactly what we're going through today, Bennett said. The chairman of the board, the operations director, and the senior pastor of this ministry have been held by one person, Mike Bickle, which is true, for nearly 20 years of this ministry. For a short stint, that was Stuart Greaves. The new organization will split these roles and not have a parachurch mission structure, but rather a missional church structure, which I don't even know what that means. Someone educate me in the comments. Bennett said, leaders will focus on keeping 24/7 prayer going as it works with a larger community to plant a new organization. The organization will focus on the next generation and an outreach, which would include helping human trafficking victims, he said. Bennett said the ministry must steward a people, its values, and its mandate from God as intercessors. That is still who we are, he said. Regardless of what the last 6 months have done, that has not changed us as a people. It has in some ways, but it hasn't changed our values and what we love and what we celebrate and enjoy. IHOPKC and all ministries involved is about a people at the end of the day in the eyes of the Lord. End quote. TRR reached out to John O'Hall, a member of the advocacy group, and a member of the advocate group who has brought allegations internally to IHOPKC's leaders about IHOPKC's closing. He wrote in a text that he hopes will be a, quote, turning point. While the response of the various IHOPKC leaders over the last 6 months have been disappointing related to dealing with sin in a biblical way, we are ever prayerful that this may mark a turning point of righteous concern to respond biblically to those who have been victimized and those who have transgressed related to sexual misconduct, he wrote. But he also expressed sadness. Quote, "We are saddened by the impact that this crisis has had on so many lives and continues to make through this recent unconfirmed news," he wrote in a text. "It didn't have to be this way," end quote. And that ends the article. And I would completely agree with Jono in that it didn't have to be this way. If IHOP from the beginning would have humbled themselves and allowed a third party investigator come in, they might have been able to save this thing. I'm not saying it would have been saved 100%, definitely, indefinite, but I feel like that would have given them more of a fighting chance from a public relations, from a marketing perspective, because then people will be like, oh man, like they're really owning up to this. I might still feel a little more comfortable giving to this ministry, right? Now, there's probably still some people that would have paused or completely removed funds because, again, there's that connection to Mike Bickle. But I think they would have been able to hang on a little longer if they would have allowed an investigation to take place. And I get it. From a financial standpoint, if you're looking at IHOP as a business, which at this point they're running it like they're treating it like a business, absolutely protect your interest, right? And so maybe their thought process is, hey, if we bring in an investigation, it's going to bring up all this dirt, it's going to bring up all this junk that we've tried to hide, we've tried to sweep under the rug allegedly. If this comes out, we're done. You ended up at the same spot that you were trying to avoid. You end up having to close your doors because of the lack of funds. So either way, you ended up in the same spot, right? I think, my personal opinion, it would have been better for you to just be transparent and open and say, these are some of our skeletons in the closet. We've done not some great things, and we repent and we apologize for that, and we want to move forward and do the right thing. But instead of that, the spirit that a lot of people felt was, we want to make this go away. We're just going to maintain the status quo. This is an attack of the enemy. This is the attack of the black horse. Mike warned us about this, and, this is just an attack and we can't give into that. And up until fairly recently, maybe like 2 months ago, they were going with that narrative until they finally had to admit that Mike spiritually manipulated the whole community, when the whole Tammy Woods situation came out, where she said allegedly that Mike was abusing her, allegedly at 14 years old. So, I talked in my 5-part series about IHOP is that there's a day of reckoning. You can't do things in the dark and expect God to not bring them to the light eventually. And so I think God is orchestrating all of this. I think God's behind all of this. I really do believe that. I believe he's really bringing things to light that need to be brought to the light to give people an opportunity to repent and really make things right. But I feel like in this spirit, it's that they're rebranding because it's more of a financial decision. And my fear is that they're just going to rebrand this thing, but it's still going to be IHOP. You know what I mean? Like, they're going to call it something different, but it's going to still be ran like an IHOP. It's still going to have the flavor of IHOP. And I think sometimes you can't get rid of that because there's probably going to still be the same leadership there. And so there's going to be things that are IHOP-y. But my fear is that they're just going to rebrand it because to mitigate liability, like Boz was talking about in the article, just to say like, oh, well, we don't have an IHOP anymore. We have XYZ church mission. And so you can't come after us because there's no IHOP anymore. Rather, you know what I mean? And so it just doesn't come off like, hey, we are rebranding because we really feel like we need to start from ground zero. We really need to rebuild because we want to do this right. To me personally, it just comes off of, we're just trying to protect our assets and we're broke financially. And so we just can't keep the machine going, which is absolutely true. But my hope and prayer is that they really do seek the Lord about how to do it the right way. Like, don't go about it the same way. Like, try something new, because what you've been doing thus far these past 24 years clearly hasn't, I mean, it's worked in some aspects, but obviously it's not working for you now because look at where you're at, right? And so I'm going to make this analogy and hopefully it connects, because it connects in my brain. But I've been like obsessed with the Dr. John Deloney show. He's part of like the whole Dave Ramsey radio theme. I don't ascribe to Dave Ramsey. I used to. Me and my husband used to be like huge Dave Ramsey fans. We're not anymore. But we did like the whole financial piece stuff. But anyway, Dr. John Deloney, he is, I think, a psychologist. But he runs the whole radio show kind of like Dave Ramsey-esque, where people can call in and he gives them like really good, solid, like relationship advice. And just some other like, I told my husband last night, it's like therapy on the radio. Like people call in and he gives them like basically free therapy for like 5-10 minutes or whatever. Sorry if you can hear my dog. He's outside. But Dr. John Deloney was giving counsel to this woman. Basically, she was really struggling in her marriage with her husband because of his ex-wife and like the co-parenting situation. And she was jealous of her and she just had a hard time getting along with her. And basically, Dr. John Deloney was like, you should just, I'm not saying you have to be your best friend, but like, you should just go out and like try to like be two grown adults and just put whatever past behind you and just start anew because you're a blended family and you've got kids. And she was like, I just can't do that. I just can't let go of like my anger, my jealousy, my resentment. And he's like, well, where has it gotten you now? He's like, it's destroying your marriage. Like, it's not serving you. It's not helping you. Try something different. Try something new. What do you got to lose, right? And that's kind of the same thing I'm thinking about IHOP is like, try something different. Try something new, because what you've done up until this point has served you kind of, but look at the path of destruction that it's left you in, right? Where now you have to close your doors, you have to close your school, you have to close all of your training camps, shut down your internships, and basically at this point you're having to go back to the beginning, which if you know the origin of IHOP in the very beginning is that they were out of like this little double wide trailer in Grandview, Missouri. And they had a very small staff, and a lot of it was driven by volunteers. This article kind of leads me to believe they're going back to that same model where it's only going to be maybe like 15-20 people on staff max, and then the rest of it is just people volunteering their time to keep this thing going. And then there's going to be some type of missional church aspect, which that brings me to a point. In the video, if you go into the Roy's report and listen to the audio, they keep talking about this Ephesians 4 model, about like we need to get to like an Ephesians 4 model of like governance and all this stuff. And I'm like, what are they talking about? So I thought I would just read Ephesians 4 to maybe get some context, because I wasn't really understanding what they were saying like about Ephesians 4 and how that kind of connects into how they want to move together. So let's see here. Okay, so Ephesians 4. So the first part, at least in my Bible, it says unity in Christ. So it says, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, this is Paul talking, beg you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing one another in love, making every effort to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God, one Father of all, who is above all and through all in all. But each one of us given grace according to the measure of Christ's gift. Therefore it said, when he ascended on high, he must make captivity itself a captive. He gave gifts to his people. And then it goes on to say like some were apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers. So it kind of sounds like the apostolic ministry, I think, is what they're trying to get to. Promoting each other in love. Okay. Let's see here. Then the next part, starting in 17, it talks about putting away the old and living in your new life in Christ. But I think what IHOP's probably referring to is that apostolic ministry, like some are apostles, preachers, teachers, whatever. So it'll be interesting to see how they kind of flesh all of that out and kind of how they try to make that work within this context of still trying to be IHOP-y, but not IHOP-y. Okay, I just want to make sure I've got a couple of my thoughts here. So like I said, one of my main thoughts is I just hope this rebranding is not them just trying to negate responsibility. I still believe there is a reckoning at some point, and just rebranding doesn't mean that you get to cancel out or negate the responsibility that you have in creating a toxic culture. And I hope that with the new rebranding that they really do bring in some really good, solid consultants and just other leaders in the body of Christ that have healthy congregations to really guide them and give them some good pointers and say, hey, look, what you thought was a successful model, scratch it. Do this. Again, do something new, like that analogy I brought up just a few minutes ago. My other thought is a third-party investigation is still needed. Just because you're rebranding, still a lot of the main players are still there. Like allegedly Dave Slyker and Stuart Greaves are still there, even though they've stepped down. Allegedly, they're still there. Isaac Bennett is still there. There's some other key players that are still there that were involved in the whole crisis management of this. And so you still need someone to come in and investigate what happened in the past. Sorry if you can still hear my dog. He is just going absolutely batshit crazy out there, and I don't know what's going on. It's like 12:40 on a Tuesday. I don't know what his deal is. I mentioned this before, but I'll reiterate again, but my fear is that they're just rebranding to limit their liability and they will not change their behavior. I really hope that it's a rebrand, but it's also a restart of how they move forward as an organization. Okay. I mentioned this before that they talked about it being a missional church with a prayer movement component. So Ephesians 4 is what they talked about, where they still feel like they're called to train, equip the next generation with a missional expression. Let's see here. I wrote down here that it was an unfortunate cost, because at the end of the day, there's so many lives that are affected by this. And John O'Hall mentioned that. Like, there's people on staff that raise funds full time. Like, being at IHOP is their full-time job. So now you're telling them, essentially, like, if you think about it in the corporate world standards, like, they're being laid off. Like, hey, we no longer have a position for you here. Like, we cannot pay you anymore, right? I mean, think of it in those terms. So you've got hundreds of people that are being laid off, told that they don't have a job anymore. And basically being told, like, you just need to figure out a transition plan without really giving them resources, which I think is also irresponsible, right? As their employer, if we're going to think of it in those terms, as their employer, you have a responsibility to help them transition on. Typically in a corporate world, if you're laying somebody off, you give them a severance, and say, hey, here's a couple months worth of pay to get you on your feet until you find something. The unfortunate thing about being a nonprofit where you essentially work for yourself, you're an entrepreneur, you raise money, if things like this happen where you're part of an organization that your funds are depleting, you have to shift very quickly. And I just don't know how prepared a lot of their staff was for this shift, and I don't know if a lot of them have the ability to shift very quickly. And so my concern is a lot, there's people on staff that have families, that have financial responsibilities, and how can you shift so quickly like that? So it's unfortunate from that perspective, because I really do feel the pain and the weight of that, where people are like, gosh, like, I'm told in a staff meeting, that basically I don't have a job, and like, and probably my position is going away. Sorry. So where do I go from here, right? And another unspoken is, if your job, let's just think of it this way. If your job has been night and day prayer to be an intercessory missionary for the last 10, 15 years, you and I know, working in a corporate world, like, there's little to zero transferable skills that go with that. You can't just put on a resume, oh, I've been an intercessory missionary for 10 years. And someone like me in HR is going to read your resume and be like, what does that mean? What type of skills do you have that you can bring to the workplace, right? And so I just feel like it's going to tailspin a lot of people. And it's unfortunate, because probably the organization was probably leading down this road anyway after the whole allegations came out. But I think IHOP could have been better served to say, hey, we see the writing on the wall here. Instead of trying to fight this, we need to really set our people up for success. We need to probably start suggesting them go get jobs, right? And things of that nature. And I can understand, too, from a financial business standpoint, you don't want to scare people because you need money to keep the machine moving. But I think you need a shift from a business mindset of keeping the machine going to more of a pastoral mindset of, we really need to start taking care of our people. and really kind of letting them know what's going on. And giving them ample time to figure it out versus, hey, we're going to be, sunsetting things very quickly, and you're going to have to go and figure out a job when, you haven't had any transferable skills over the past several years. I think people that might be able to make it in a corporate type of sense or outside of IHOP as musicians. You could probably go get a church, job at a church playing music. People that are probably in the executive type of board, there's probably some transferable skills there. But if you were just a true intercessory missionary where your job was just to pray, read your Bible, lead prayer sets, that was your job, I feel for you, because you don't have really a lot of transferable skills to the corporate real world. Let's be real, there's not a lot of churches that can pay people to be on their staff like that. I think IHOP was a unique situation where you had to raise funds, but you could probably get a little bit of a stipend to make it by. So I guess what I'm saying is that there is going to be some type of reshifting where people are not going to be absorbed into local churches here in the Kansas City community. I live in Kansas City. We do have a lot of churches around here, but I think if you have hundreds of people that have just been like, my job literally was to pray, there's just not a lot of jobs in traditional church settings where you could continue on doing that. There's just a reckoning there. There's just a shifting that has to take place. And so my genuine prayer is that people land where they need to land. God takes care of them and makes things happen for them. So I'll end it there. Thanks, guys, for watching. And more to come, right? More to come on this whole thing. I'm sure more things will come out as IHOP starts to rebrand and things of that nature. We'll kind of just figure out what's going on. But overall, my synopsis is I think God's behind all of this. My personal opinion, and it talks about it in the Bible too, that, what's done in the dark will be brought to the light. And so I believe God's bringing a lot of things to light, and there is a reckoning with that if you don't want to do the right thing. So I'll just end it there, and I just pray for everyone at IHOP that, all those folks that are affected, that they find a soft landing into their next season of life, wherever God has them to be. So anyway, I will end the video here. Thank you so much for watching again. If you liked the video, feel free to like it, share it with friends, give me a comment. I would love to hear your thoughts on all of this, especially after reading the report yourself, listening to the audio yourself. I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this. So leave me some comments down in the comments section, because again, I would love to hear from y'all about what you think about all this is going on. So anyway, I will talk to you guys later. Bye.